One, welcome back, everybody. This is another episode of PEs in Conversation with. My name is Fernando Martinez. I am one of your hosts.
My name is Jefferson Denham. I'm another host.
I'm Samantha Garcia, and I'm your third host.
And yeah, we have you back after
Yay!
a year. This is exciting. But what? Okay, yeah, maybe that's a weird way to start off because the next part's gonna be a little bit serious. Because we do have something that we wanted to talk about that we think is very important. It's both obviously in the context of performance, but also what's been happening in the country in the last 2 weeks alone. Just wanted to start off by saying the world again has been experiencing a lot of changes with COVID vaccines becoming readily available and cities reopening across the country. We have once again have to adapt to changes. Right, so the world that we knew back then is not the same one that we know now. And since then, we have also witnessed, unfortunately, tragedies in the last few days, some of which are tied to the body, which is what we want to talk about today. And although we still mourn the loss that our API community and brothers and sisters have endured, not just in the last week, but in the last year since we've known about the COVID pandemic here in the US, we would like to take this time to have a conversation on the body specifically. If there's one thing that we have always flourished in and supported within the ensemble space, it would be having conversations on issues that can change lives, issues that affect the body and the livelihood of both of the self and of others. Moreover, we have done this not just with speaking, but alongside movement, creating, delivering lines in rhythm, and to allow others to question, to comment, to critique, and to act in response to it. Today, we want to understand how our bodies fit within the performance space and how our bodies have transformed because of it. We want to consider these questions given that we, the three of us, come from varying ethnic, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds. We also want to talk about what we do for and because of social change and social justice, which I recognize is a very serious thing. So I don't know if you guys just have some thoughts about what's been happening in the world, just not even in the world, literally in the US in the last 2 weeks. JD, I don't know if you have any thoughts, any comments.
Well, it's as you were reminding us to, think about what's been going on. Of course, the mass shootings. It's just ridiculous that we have to keep talking about mass shootings as if we can't figure out anything to do about it. And so we're going to hear the same old song and dance. I'll get a little political and then I'll pivot. Of the people on the extreme right who hug their guns and say, we can't do any sort of legislation that would prohibit anybody from having a gun at any time. And what's strange about that is, and maybe you guys have seen this statistic as well, but most of the members of the National Rifle Association are for more gun control. They're for it. They're not saying take away our guns, but they're saying, hey, background checks, not a bad idea. So it's just infuriating that our quote unquote leaders in Washington can't agree when a majority of Americans, including those in the National Rifle Association, agree that something must and can be done. But specifically to the body, and I think this is something that most everybody watching probably already knows, that we internalize stress, right? And if you've ever been to a chiropractor or ever stretched out in a yoga class, or even if you've never done that, but you certainly feel the tension of when you hear, just watching the news can make you tense up, right? And so we internalize it. This is like my opening salvo, I suppose you could say, is talking about the body. All the stressors in and around us, we take it in. And if we don't deal with it, it will have its way with us in a negative fashion, I think. So there's kind of like my opening thoughts. Sam, what do you think?
I really like everything that you just said. I think looking deep into where all like the rulemaking is coming from, that there's unexpected places where you can find people supporting a cause that you don't think would be supporting a certain cause. And as for the body, we definitely internalize The stress, and I feel like all these traumatic experiences that are going on currently are having an effect on bodies everywhere, on bodies of the US, you know, no matter what, even like, you know, race, color, socioeconomic background, it's truly affecting everybody. And there are there's tensions building up, but I feel like we're moving in a way where people are expressing themselves more through the body, creating more art and different ways of expressing this trauma. And I feel like that it can be good and bad, and we'll talk more about that for sure. And there's definitely a way to release all of this trauma.
Thank you both for answering that. Like it, for me, I mean, obviously you two like know me personally, but I'm like super outspoken, and like I'm always getting pissed off with everybody, especially people in charge. And it's just like with everything that's happened in the last 2 weeks, it's been weird for me. In And that's a weird thing to say considering people literally lost their lives, right? And people have their entire lives changed because they lost somebody. But from my standpoint, it's been weird because I'm in a place where I sort of involve myself with these groups of people who are very active in social change, right? Like they are always fighting the good fight. And I also have this other group of people that don't necessarily do that, and that's fine. Um, but some of their opinions have become somewhat dangerous, and so it's weird seeing both of those things, and it's frustrating because every time something happens, right, it always becomes an issue of but what about me, what about me, what about me, what about our people? And it's like, chill out, like it's everybody, but something's just happened and we need to have a conversation about it. As far as the body goes, and this is something that I'm gonna ask you guys in a bit. But as far as the body goes, it's so important to talk about it because a lot of the things that we do are oftentimes rooted in these sort of um, stereotypical ideas of what a body is and is not, what a body should or should not do, right? And we were sort of talking about this a little bit before the show, but just talking about how um, Asian bodies, specifically Asian women, are fetishized, right? They're not looked at as people; they're looked at as things, and a lot of that is what led to what happened in the last 2 weeks. And so I feel like we have a lot to talk about with that, and we're sort of gonna not switch gears a little bit and talk about it more in a performative space. And then the reason why I want to do that is because obviously we cannot speak for other people, right? At least I cannot. And, if you guys feel like you cannot, then that's obviously fine. What we can do is advocate for issues, which in turn will allow others to respond to it in one way or another. It might allow others to act because of it, right? The more we talk, the more they're able to do. And so the question that I have for you guys is, how do we approach real world issues as they are happening in real time when what we do is performative, when what we do is on stage? How do we tackle issues that are happening on stage? JD, I don't know if you wanted to go first.
Yeah, I'll go first. Well, I think that we've talked about this before too, that everything we're doing, even right now, is performative. If you want to look around you, theater is what all the world's a stage, right? So theater is happening everywhere. And if you are not a person who is in a position of power, let me rephrase that. If you're trying to do things to combat power, you use your body. Really, that's the number one place to start. If you're looking at the protests in Myanmar or the Black Lives Matter protests, we're just getting out there, using our body and our voices to demonstrate, to sort of say, look, I'm here and I don't have $1 million, but I'm going to give my energy, and my energy combined with your energy. There's just something powerful about that. In specific to performance ensemble, I think that the other day I was in line at a pharmacy, and the guy behind me was just cursing up a store because so and so, he didn't see this, but so and so had been through the line already, was asked to wait while they got the prescription. So then when it's her turn to go back, this guy behind me is like, fucking fuck, we're standing here in line. By the way, there's not a long line, it's just me and him. But oh, he's pissed off. And what that tells me is we're internalizing all this anger, all this rage, all this pressure, and it's just going to come out. You cannot, it's not going to come in and lie dormant. Something will happen. And when we're doing a performance ensemble piece, sometimes we can express that in a way that an audience can go, oh my gosh, I recognize myself there. I think I'm going to think twice about that behavior, or I'm going to think twice about the other side of that argument. Like there's two sides to everything, right? So that's one of the things I think is really beneficial with performance ensemble, one of many, is that any feelings that we have in our bodies, we have the opportunity as performers to demonstrate what that could look like, what it many times looks like, and then what we can aspire to have it look like as well.
That's beautiful, Jeff. I agree, especially going back to the beginning of what you said, that, everything we do, especially in context with trying to be a catalyst for change, it is performative, right? And so rather than, I feel like, what are bodies like? How are they tackling this issue on the stage? I think it's more of a tackling these issues with an audience, basically, because the world is your audience, especially in this day and age. Like, look at us doing all of this Zooming and all of this, whatever, anything that has to do with seeing a face on a screen or a body on a screen, right? Or out protesting, or out, in the public, wherever. And how the body is, the vessel. This is the vessel for change. And the way we go about performing this body is one of the number one things, is what's going to affect the world around you. And for some reason, talking about this, you're talking about combating power. And I think, and also like the rage that gets suppressed, it's almost like, that's what humans, all humans, like little or small, some not just unjustified completely, committing mass shootings, and some, are just yelling in line because of their, suppression. It makes me think a little bit historically about human behavior, and how like the Romans and the Spanish and used to pillage. They used to pillage other cultures, and they used to take what they believe is rightfully theirs. Just no mercy. No, there's not even media. There's nothing but the conqueror and the land, and the people trying to defend their land. And I know that strays away a little bit from the stage, but coming back to that, I believe there's something in the human body, in the human mind, and human consciousness, that there is some kind of like internal rage or resistance towards something that makes people lose it, and go out there, and we kind of perform to keep that healthy, if that makes sense. I feel like we perform to keep those combative reflexes under, either not under control, but transmuted into like a way that would actually create some kind of change, if that all makes sense. So I feel like also agreeing with Jeff, what we must do is to perform with our bodies what we believe the world should look like, if that makes sense.
And can I just add to that one of the things I feel like, Sam, you just made me think that one of the things in modern society that is kind of detrimental, certainly in the land of COVID, where, like you said, we're doing the Zoom thing, there's a disconnect. And I'll just speak for myself, being a very tall person, I'm 6'4". I always felt very awkward with my body in general, right? We had Sir on, and I was so envious because Sir is terrific with movement and dance. And I just like, I wish I could do that. But I think society, I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. I think society values your head, your brain, and would rather just kind of put your body in a second class cabin, if you know what I mean. It's not as important as your head. Where, and I think we do ourselves a disservice as society and as an individual when we don't recognize how integrated everything is. And when you neglect the body, when you neglect how important it is to have it be a part of your being. I know that almost sounds silly to say, but I felt, tempted to kind of like, whatever, as long as I can think, as long as I can process, and you're not realizing that your body is influencing how you think and process, right? You don't recognize how, I don't sometimes, how important it is to have your body a part of everything. And so one of the things about performance ensemble that I found terrifying and ultimately liberating was how we are called upon to integrate our whole selves. I can't think of any other place in society other than maybe a yoga class or something where you're called to do that. And you just realize, wow, there's so much more here than I thought or than I recognized. And it's kind of like a aha moment for me.
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. So there's like two things that I want to talk about. I think that real quick, I want to respond to what you just said, and then I have another question for you. Is that literally just came out of what the both of you just said right now about combating power. But going back to this idea of the body sort of being this being separated from the person, right? Like it's so weird to like you said, it is weird to think about the body as being something as separate from the self, right? And what is odd to me is that we often look at bodies as something that can be grotesque, something that should be hidden away, right? Just like even if it's the everyday performance of having to put on clothes, more so for women than for men, right? Like you have the whole weird thing of like men can go around shirtless and it's not a big deal, but if women do, it's a big deal. But it's fine if it's at the beach, but it's not fine if it's anywhere else, right? um and it takes me back to this performance that we did, and we took it to Petagene a couple years ago, and I remember just being so uncomfortable with my body and just always wanting to hide behind the baggiest clothes and whatever, right? Like I was just super self-conscious, and this performance called for us to have to remove our clothes, and I was like, I never want to do that, but I didn't even think about it and I did it. And I think it because it was a bunch of guys on stage who like took off their shirts, and I forgot what the point of it was, but um the response we got wasn't even like oh man, that's deep. It was more like everybody was just laughing because they thought it was funny, right? And so we don't associate the body with something that can be serious, with something that can actually um that can literally means life and death for some people, right? That can mean change for some people, that can mean um policy for others. We think of like the free the nipple movement, right? Like that's a big thing, and like a lot of people do find it funny, but it's true though. Like that's it makes zero sense to me that people argue over stuff like that. um and then going back to the other thing that you guys were talking about, like combating power, if it, because I don't know if maybe somebody who wants to join the ensembles watching this, but like I said earlier, I've if there's something that academia has done for me, is that it's made me very cynical. Right? Like I'm just always pissed at everybody, and I call a lot of people out for it. And like I've been really just pissed off at the institutions, even in like including the one that I work for, the one that I'm recording this for. Like I have zero problem calling it out. Like I have issues with it. Um, how do we perform combating power on stage if what we are combating might be the people in the audience? Like how do you work through something like that, right? Like a quick example of when I used to do a lot of like gentrification pieces in a group where a lot of people were gentrifiers, how do we perform something that combats power when the power is in the room with us? I don't know if anybody wants to answer that.
I'm going to say, Sam, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump in and say that I've been watching a lot of, just for no other reason than it's just a fascinating subject, stuff on the civil rights movement. And so James Baldwin, there's a great thing that you can watch. I can't remember if it's on Netflix or whatever, called I Am Not Your Negro, which is fabulous. And then I've been watching a lot of Malcolm X speeches and then Martin Luther King speeches. And to your point, when there's a hostile, so as we were just saying earlier, life is theater. Think about the sit-ins at the counter. All white, we'll only serve white people here. Then the black folks all sit at the counter, and there is a visceral response from those standing around. They can't just let it go. So to your question, are we willing to put our bodies, which is really a tool, a weapon, a voice, instrument of protest and can advocate shock value just by the mere fact of sitting at a lunch counter, right? You're going to instigate some kind of weird response from people who are racist or the very thing that you're trying to push against. I think it takes courage. I don't think it's a question of do we know what to say? It's are we willing to say it and then let other people react, right? Their reactions they have to be responsible for their own actions. It's like we were talking about, the mass shooting in Atlanta, in Georgia. The assailant was saying, well, they're too provocative for me. I'm a Christian dude and it's too tempting. So God's telling, he didn't say this, but it's like he feels justified in killing people who are tempting him versus saying, you know what, I think I got my own responsibility here. So if the art that we produce in performance ensemble or anywhere provokes a strong reaction, it's usually ripping apart a facade and you're calling people out for what's going on and they don't like it. When you're called out in that way, your reaction, a lot of the anger this is just my amateur psychology here. When you are called out, when that bright spotlight is pointed to how you are, let's say your racist tendencies or anything that's just ugly that you'd rather not deal with, you're going to respond and you're going to lash out, I think. Are we willing to let that happen for the sake of the bigger audience, which is the world or the nation or whatever, the city or the state, when they see this happening? Think about all the civil rights things that were documented. It's the shocking footage of dogs being unleashed on children, police dogs on children. And, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, when John Lewis was crossing, and they're just walking. And here comes the police with their batons and their dogs. And the world sees this. And so it's not just the audience immediate, the micro, but the macro audience. That's where it really starts it seems, to make a bigger effect when you can, this little theater that has been demonstrated or played out can have a transformative effect on society and on the world. But are we willing to be that courageous to provoke that spark?
Absolutely. I think courage is definitely the number one thing. And courage is it's a hard thing to cultivate. It takes time to cultivate courage, really true courage that leads you to, mindful and effective action and change. And I agree with you, Jeff. It really just takes courage and just doing, because a lot of people, they sit and they talk and they talk about, their issues that they have with what's going on. But when it comes to really, stepping up to the plate and using your body, putting your body on the line for what it is that you are talking about and trying to stand for is very important. And I was just doing a little bit of analytic thinking about what your main question, Fernando. How do you combat power with performance when the people in power are your audience and are the people that you are almost trying to change? I think if we were to think really deeply about this, I think performances that as much as as good and bad there is in this world, people have their set beliefs and values and perspectives. And some are very different, you know, than ours, than theirs, than whoever. Everybody has their own background that they come from, where this sense of self has been cultivated. So, you know, how do you try to make a difference in somebody's mind with something that they've been conditioned for so long, maybe their whole life? You know, how do you try and change that? And I think that, you know, when people think about their performance, maybe to not to agree with the other side, but to consider, to like look into, um, you know, why these people have certain beliefs, and kind of absorb that, and utilize that information that, you know, that you find to, you know, to kind of like add to your performance, you know, using like, I mean, we taught all of us taught public speaking, right? And we taught audience analysis,
Hmm.
right? We taught that subject. So I feel like that is a really important thing, that you know, like when you really really do want to make a change, like, you know, it can't, like, you know, there's protests, there's performances, there's all these things that are really great, and they really push, and they really you know, gather people to you know, combat like a dark force or whatever. But um so the things that may really stick in their minds and not just be brushed off as like, oh my gosh, like, you know, that's not right, is if you really make them think, and if you can use your body somehow, and you know, do your own work, and analyze what's going on. I think that can kind of be like a really important trigger in other people's minds. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that a combination of what both of you guys have said too is something that I've been thinking about, right? Because like when I think about um again combating power in a room full of power, um obviously we all come from different places and in our own standpoints, and that's what sort of adds to what we believe, right? Um and unfortunately there's some people do uh believe in things that can be dangerous for others or whatever the case may be, right? But like you said, I think understanding where they're coming from, or at least acknowledging where they're coming from, right? Like, maybe you may not understand it completely, but you can acknowledge where they come from. I think is good. But yeah, to me, a lot of it is just like education. I think like the bare minimum has always been education. If you can educate yourself, if you can educate others on something that they may not know about, right? And maybe that's why they believe what they believe. And if you're able to educate them, um, without attacking them, I guess, is something that you can do. Um, but speaking of finding the right ways of doing things, I do have another question for you guys that I sort of wanted, like another guided question. And this sort of comes from me scrolling on social media, right? So and I know we keep bringing this up, but the week that the attacks happened, there was a lot of, I think, a lot of support, and it was really beautiful. And I saw a lot of people coming together, and I think I also saw a lot of people recognizing that, you know, we're always standing up for a lot of groups, but we fail to sort of recognize and protect other groups, right? When you think of um, when you think of people of color, or when you think of groups that are subjugated or discriminated against, people hardly ever talk about AAPI, right? Like they hardly talk about Asian American or Pacific Islander people, rarely. Um, and to me, it's always been upsetting, I think, and it's always been an issue. And so when I saw the outpour of support, I thought it was beautiful. But what's also been happening too is I've been seeing these conversations on, you know, what the right thing or the right step is to making change after that happened, right? So what is the best way to make something happen? And so the conversation was, oh, you shouldn't be just posting these things on your stories. You should be doing more on top of that, or it's okay if you just do this because that's all you can do, whatever, right? So like there's just so many different options you can go. So you can educate others by sharing a lot of these resources, or you can take action by calling people in Congress, by calling your representatives and asking for change, asking for bills to be passed. um, so the question that I had for you guys was, what role and what space is given to performance to do something similar, to cause, I think, tangible physical and mental change, right? So what space do we have when we have Instagram, where we can share all these organizations and all these news, when we have phones that we can call our representatives? What space does performance have in relation to those things?
I would say that performance, this is something that Sam alluded to. When you can understand someone in a visceral way, it can break down barriers. And so if you can show how, let's say there's a demographic that someone has a problem with, but you can show that they're human beings, just we all bleed the same. And if you can understand where they're coming from, the animosity can be dissipated. And that's what I think is beautiful about art in general. Uh, I think that, TV in the last 15 years has completely changed America's view on homosexuality, right? Because you see characters that you like. Oh, it's just a human, rather than this monster that maybe we're taught to hate. You've heard this before. I'm not saying things nobody's heard of. Children don't hate. Children are not prejudiced. We have to be taught to be that way. So how do you unteach it? I think through the arts, through performance, where you can demonstrate. So you're kind of like getting inside someone's heart and soul by showing them, I can see myself in them. The very people I was taught to hate, I can see myself in them. So maybe I'm wrong about this, right? And so if you can get people to feel, don't they say people make decisions based on feeling much more than intellect? And if you can get them to at least feel something and then they can think about it, I feel like that's the power of performance ensemble, and that's the power of art.
Absolutely, Jeff. Like, damn well said. We all bleed the same, and I do believe that pain is a universal thing, and that nobody's pain, no matter how little or small or whoever you are, it hurts the same, feels the same exact way, no matter what your problems are. So, yeah, that's just like the best point, is to, even talking about that guy that was yelling in line, going back even earlier in the conversation, you show people, you perform what you want to see in the world. And if you want to be understood, you must also do the understanding. And to be able to relay that performatively is pretty powerful. So Fernando, with your question, where does performance fit in, right, in making in doing these changes, like, how there's so many options out there with the social media and calling Congress and doing all these awesome things that you can do. Performance, I think, if we're just I think in meta terms sometimes. So I really think that performing yourself, like being you, like to the fullest, like at your core, whatever is like deep, right? I think a few conversations ago, Jeff, we had this conversation about how you said performance ensemble like brought out something in you that's been like hiding away, and then you conquered things that you didn't think that you could. I think just showing, just people seeing that kind of performance happening, people seeing that change in one person can make somebody think another way. It's all, I feel like all of this is all about just showing somebody another perspective in order to realize that we're really all the same. There is no separation, but there's these societal bounds and societal things that we were taught, because children, when we're born, all we know is love. We just want to play and love, and there's no there's no color, there's no whatever, there's no race, there's no politics, there's nothing but just love. And then we are conditioned to believe a certain way. And these things can definitely be undone, because since we had that when we were kids, it's still there, and we can use performance to really bring that hidden thing to the surface.
And I love, Sam, you just said something that I wanted to tag on. You had said, performance ensemble encourages us in performance ensemble to be our fullest self, right? I wonder, and I'll just pose this to you guys, I wonder if the animosity people feel, I've always heard the phrase hurt people hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're harboring some self-hatred or animosity within yourself, it's going to manifest itself towards others. And the opposite, I'm wondering, is true. If you can be fully accepting of yourself and fully accepting and encouraging to yourself to be your best self, that I think couldn't help but spill out into how you treat other people. And so I'm going to say performance ensemble helps us be our best selves so that we have more capacity to give to others.
Yeah, so I just to like follow, but I had a lot of thoughts. But to follow you guys up, because a lot of the arguments that you guys have made, to me sounds a lot like, and then agree with me or maybe disagree with me if I got it wrong, but like a lot of it also just alludes to, the quite literally the theater, the space at the theater, right? Like the thing in my background, like that is the place where you can not just like learn new things, but unlearn the things that you've been either conditioned to believe, or things that you decided to pick up on your own, right? Because like sometimes like the things that we think are awful, people got on their own. Like nobody conditioned them, like they did that to themselves, right? And it makes me think of a couple of examples, like just within the ensemble itself. And I think this is something that's important for people to hear, because when was it? I think, Sam, it might have been when we graduated, like the semester after. There was a member of the ensemble who is vegan, right? Nicole, if you remember her, and she did a wonderful piece. A lot of her performances are based around based on veganism, right? And in treating animals like animals, because we're also animals and we're all equal, right? Like that's, a lot of her pieces are beautiful in that sense. And it was performed in Arkansas, which already is a state that is economically lower than California, right? It's harder to come by those options. Like it's harder to be vegan in a state that's a little bit more poor, especially in certain cities and certain counties. And so I believe that a student from a different school from the South called that out, and then they sort of pointed that out, and told Nicole. And I think that they sort of had this conversation where it's like, oh, I can still push this, but I understand that. Like I recognize that for some people it may not be doable, right? And I have this conversation with so many people about like being vegan, or like I think it's a wonderful thing, but not everybody can do it, right? Because sometimes it does take money to be able to choose what you can or cannot eat, or what you don't or do want to eat. And I think that the ensemble does that. I think a lot of us have come face to face with things that maybe we don't necessarily align ourselves with, or maybe it felt like, oh, maybe I've been following the wrong thing, or maybe they're following the wrong thing, and that's fine. Like you can question those things. Like that's the whole purpose, right? Is you get to question these things. Um, yeah, I think that's just sort of the response I had immediately after you guys were talking about like having to learn and unlearn these things. And then Sam, you also said something interesting about like when we're kids, like all we see is joy. And it's crazy to think about that, because yeah, like a lot of what we see is just joy, right? Like it's love. Obviously for some kids it may not be that, because they may be facing unfortunate circumstances, but for a lot of us it is joy. And what's interesting is I don't know. I think that maybe this allows us to look back and be more introspective and recognize where things sort of went awry, where things went south, right? And having to correct a lot of that so that we can be better, or other people can be better. Um, and we, and I'm bringing this up because I'm also thinking about textual studies, which I think we all took together, right, with Jade. And we were doing this exercise. I don't know if you guys remember, but it was a question. It was like like a card question game. I don't recall if I think somebody would pull out a card and it was like race based, and so you would ask the question, and nobody was allowed to talk except for the person who has to answer the question. And one of the questions was something to do with recognizing ourselves through whatever cultural or ethnic or racial background we have, right? And a lot of me growing up wasn't even like, oh, I'm Mexican or I'm Salvadorian or I'm brown, I'm this or that. Like, I never really experienced that until I had a negative experience. It wasn't until somebody told me, oh, it's because you are this, and that's not good, that I realized, like, oh, I'm Mexican, I'm Salvadorian, I'm brown. Like, that's, so those are the things that you get to learn and unlearn, right? Like, you get to sort of question those things. You sort of pick at them. You even if you don't know what the answer is, you can lay the question out in the performance space and allow your audience to think about it with you. Right? You may not get the answer that you're hoping for. You may not get an answer at all. But the fact that you were able to put that question into the spaces, I think, is what it does too. That was my ramble, you know?
No, can I
Yeah.
continue rambling on your ramble? So one of the things you just said, which I think is really profound, is letting the audience discover with you. I would say performance ensemble, performance in general, is a space, if done right, if done in an effective way, with the audience in mind, to say, look, we're going to discover something new that I'm dealing with. But I might have mentioned this before. I'll say it again. In one of my therapy groups, there's a profound exercise called Thought Challenge. And I love it because it keeps you humble, right? It makes you, well, first of all, you get to say, if a negative thought is occurring to you, you go, I'm going to challenge that thought. Just because you have the thought doesn't mean you have to act on it. You can disown that thought, especially if it's not yours. We inherit so much crap. We were just saying, kids' first experiences, hopefully, are love and joy. And then you're taught other crap, or other adults tell you, make sure you don't, we never associate with the neighbors down the street, whatever. And so now you get to say, that's a thought. I'm going to challenge it. In performance ensemble, you get to challenge it in your piece, and you're doing it in such a way, because there's a slight distance between the performance and the audience members sitting there. It's a little safer for them to experience this and to challenge it in their own head, because you're not coming at them with a bludgeon saying, change your mind. You're, it takes courage, and you've got to be able to feel these feelings for yourself, for anyone else to feel them too. So you have to be sincerely exploring. And that gives the audience the freedom that they need to freely explore a thought that maybe should be dislodged and probably gotten rid of.
Yeah, and also it's just, again, because I sort of wanted to answer the question that I asked you guys. 'Cause I haven't even been answering my own questions. So, like, I really quickly wanted to answer about what, like, role and space is given in performance when it comes to changing something, right? 'Cause, like, you two gave really beautiful answers, and I think that for me, what it, like, what role it has and what space it has is to promote the bare minimum. And I've been using that phrase so much lately because we don't recognize how what we're doing is barely enough, you know? And I think that's a wake up call. So I think with performance, it's just having something being questioned, or being presented a new thought, a new idea, is the bare minimum, right? Like, if you educate yourself, and to me, thinking, just thinking alone is education, right? Because you're doing a lot of work, you're doing a lot of critical and analytical work, like you said, Sam, and like, that's something we taught our students, right? So just doing thinking is the bare minimum. I think that's a tool that people need, and if they choose to sort of consume themselves with that, then that's good, because then that leads to the next step, right? Maybe we might have performed something that people were like, oh, I didn't know that, I want to know more, so they continue to educate themselves. Or we brought up an issue and now people want to make change, so they want to make phone calls, or they want to write letters to people, or they want to start um I don't know, leading events, leading rallies, leading marches. Like that's how change happens, right? And to me, that's like the role and space that it's given. And because we've been talking a lot about education, I sort of want to move on to the third and sort of final guiding question that I had for both of you, specifically because like Sam has pointed out, we've all taught at CSUN. We have also all gotten our master's degrees, right? So we do have educational privilege. We have academic privilege. Um, and so the question specifically, I want to start off by saying that academia itself is sort of a lot of it is this sort of a knowledge gatekeeping, right? Like that's what it is. A lot of academia is like we have a lot of answers and questions, and we have quote unquote smart people writing stuff, but it's only for us. Nobody else can have it, right? Give us $20,000 for a degree and you can have some of this information, right? Unless you want to pay $30 for a paper. Um, it does not allow people
Wait,
out.
I could have just paid $30? No, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, like
You just have gone on YouTube? Are you serious?
yeah, yeah. Academia really doesn't allow people outside of academia to access it, right? To access the information that we've been privileged to confront, to critique, to learn from. And that being said, I wanted to ask you guys: um, do you feel like we perform the things that we've read, the things that we've learned, the things that we've critiqued on stage? Do you feel like we are sharing that information, that education with others, or do you feel like there's still room for that to grow?
Hmm. Wow, that's a great question. You know, you had mentioned textual studies, which we took. I feel like that class opened my brain, and it made me realize how how many possibilities are available to us to be a vessel for the stuff that we're learning, and then passing it on in a way to bring other people into the conversation. I know we've both been taught that, you know, and when you're writing a paper, you're joining the conversation, right? And so that's how I feel like education was for me. As a matter of fact, to your point, Fernando, um, there is a gatekeeper aspect. There's a lot of stuff that you know, when I left college, all of a sudden I couldn't access the library like I used to be able to. And you realize, wow, all this stuff that we are learning is not generally available. But what I will say is that I feel like the most important thing I learned throughout college, and this is undergrad and grad school, is how to learn, how to be curious. Because even if I can't access the library at CSUN, oh, I can find information. We live in a day and age where you can find information on the internet very easily if you want to be, if you're hungry to learn. So as long as there's that aspect to it, I don't know, you guys both taught, as I did, there was a difference between students who just wanted to parrot back to you just to get a grade and those that were absorbing it and learning. And many times, I'm giving this away, I would reward people with better grades, even if they weren't nailing it, because I could see growth.
Mm-hmm.
So those kind of lessons, I feel like I wanted to portray in a subtle way or in an overt way in performance ensemble.
Wow. You had something, Fernando?
Yeah, oh, I was just gonna ask you, Sam. Do you feel like, after hearing what JD said, what he beautifully said, do you feel like there's still a lot of room for what we do on stage to grow in terms of sharing a lot of the things that we've learned through the academy or through the institution?
Absolutely. Thank you for repeating the question because I got so lost in Jeff's amazing answer that I was like, where did this come from again? But no, absolutely. And I completely agree with everything that Jeff said. And they're definitely, I think it's great actually what we do. And especially, I feel like you, Fernando, like in your performances, you really do. And when we're in class, just like talking about it, you really do incorporate the things we learn in our higher level classes into your performances, which I think is great. And, you know, I think that's much better than handing them a Habermas book, because you know what I mean? Because a lot of these, honestly, like books that like we've read, and all the locked away like books, and all the works and the journals, the academic journals that we go through, there's a lot of it that is just a bunch of opinionated mumbo jumbo. And you know, it's just like a lot of it, you know, sometimes it's just like, wow, really? Like, you know, like that was their passion. Like the people that wrote, like that was their passion. They got so into it, but then it's almost like Russian, even to like, you know, just like to try and like figure out. But the I the fact that we learned how to learn what the hell they were saying, and to eat, and there is much value. I'm not just like saying it's like completely invaluable. I mean, like, hey, what do we pay for? But it like it really opened, yeah, like what I like the visual I got, Jeff, when you said that class opened your brain. Literally, yeah, me too. Cracked open my
right?
brain. Just like whoa, like this is something that like we can absorb and learn. And there is definitely, I feel like we can bring a lot more to performances, you know, but also I think that just being people that have like absorbed that, and you know, like found what's valuable and what isn't, we're able to discern what is useful for the world, like what will actually help, rather than just, you know, handing out information. Like that would be cool. I mean, if somebody like really wanted uh access to, let's say, like a journal that I had access to, I would love to just gladly, illegally, like something, just like screenshot and just like send it over, because you deserve that, you know. But I think it's really something when we can actually go through that process of learning and then performing what we've absorbed, because it's
Mhm.
bound to come out anyway, because that's what our brains are flooded with, right? Like we've read so much.
Yeah.
And I think inevitably it all just comes out and people are able to access that.
And you know, Sam, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting you, Fernando, but real quickly, I just wanted to respond to what Sam was saying, because I think that it's profound that when you start to recognize, as Sam was alluding to, like, here's this book, but this isn't the final word. This is just his guy's opinion. We can then say, well, my experience says yes to that, maybe not so much to that. And I'm going to ask both of you. I kind of felt that way when we were able to have a Q&A after Performance Ensemble, because then we could say, okay, now what do you think? It's like, we presented you with our thoughts and our feelings, and this is how these subjects look to us. How do they look to you? I think that's really cool that Performance Ensemble does that, because then the audience gets to say. I don't think that usually happens right away in most shows, but that I thought was really cool. Fernando, do you agree?
Yeah, actually, yeah. So I have another thing that I was gonna say, but first I want to respond to that. You're absolutely right. I feel like we don't give enough. Like, I think the Q&As don't get enough of a shout out in these shows. You know, like in these episodes. Like, we forget to tell people, like, yeah, like after a show, after every single show, even when we do a show 3 times, you know, during our like final week, every single show has a Q&A, and it you're absolutely right. I think it gives the room to the audience. It's no longer yours, it's theirs, and they get to make of what you've presented whatever they want with that, right? And I think a lot of that also connects to the other point that I was gonna sort of respond to Sam about, because that's the thing too. Like I want people to notice how it's just like easily and nonchalantly we can critique the very same institution that gave us the privilege to learn, right? Like I appreciate it. Like I it's an experience that I adore, that I look back with a lot of, I think, goodness in my heart. But there's a lot of things that I still think are just, it's just bogus, right? Um but a lot of that to me is also just reminiscent of Western traditional education versus non-Western education, right? A lot of non-Western, a lot of native and indigenous education literally is storytelling, right? It is passing stories down from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next, until what we have today is what we have. And I think that if I were to answer that question, like obviously I mean, to me, it seems like it's obvious that we have so much more to do, right? Like there's so much more room for growth, and I think there always will be. I don't think we'll ever reach the point of like, okay, we've done everything we can to educate others based off of the education that we have. That's never going to happen. At least I don't think so. Maybe I'm just being cynical.
No.
But what we are able to do is sort of use a different method of education, right? And it's also the reason why it pisses me off so much when people say that things like the arts are a waste of public funding, right? Like I've had people I know say that like, oh, what we do is stupid, or like they wouldn't be caught dead watching what we have to do like on stage, and I'm like, well, there's value to a lot of arts. Like if you like reading a book, then you're a hypocrite, because same thing, right? If you like watching movies, same thing. And we get to teach people through storytelling, and obviously not everybody's going to do something that's super deep. So if anybody that's listening to this thing's like, oh, I have to come up with a really deep, like I have to be a person that's been through a lot of traumatic, no, you don't. Like you can just share whatever it is that you want. We've had a lot of people just do really like goofy, really lighthearted stuff, and that's needed. A lot of people need that stuff too. um but I think that's what it is. I think that we get to teach in a very non-traditional way that a lot of people don't respect enough. In that we're always going to have to keep growing, right? And at the end of the day, at the end of the show, the floor becomes the audience's and no longer ours. And I think that's how they end up learning too. I think that being said, I wanted to say thank you to both of you for joining me on this conversation. I think this is a perfect moment to sort of let everybody know and just thank everybody for joining us. This was Performance Ensembles in Conversation with. My name is Fernando Martinez. I am one of your hosts.
My name is Jefferson Denham. I'm another one of your hosts.
My name is Samantha Garcia, and I'm lucky number 3.
Yeah, right. Bye, guys. I always do this. I don't know how to stop recording.